بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to this is our 8th lecture. Welcome to the 8th lecture, inshallah, in which we'll be discussing the books of the Hanafi madhab. The books of the Hanafi madhab, and we're going to touch upon the issue of mu'tabar and ghair mu'tabar books. So in the last few lectures, we spoke about the issue of the institutionalization of taqleed and why it became incumbent upon the qadi or the mufti to give fatwa based upon the mufta bihi or the mu'tamad of the madhab, or firstly to stick to the madhab. Then of course, when you have different opinion within the madhab, there has to be some sort of mechanism in place so we can provide a consistent presentation of the madhab. Otherwise, for example, a mufti can come along and say, or a qadi rather, that's where more problem comes about. A qadi come along and say, well, I think that Abu Hanifa said this, Muhammad Hassan Shaybani said this, Abu Yusuf said this, and Tahawi said this. I want to give fatwa on Tahawi. I want to give fatwa on Khassaf. I want to give fatwa here. And so, though again, the same issue of inconsistency will come about. So therefore, there was a need for, especially later Hanafi scholars, when you have these differences of how to decide what to give fatwa on, right? So you have this kind of process within the madhab which allows a person to navigate through based upon authority. Now that's all great, and a lot of the taqseem that we talk about of the mujtahideen is quite later, because in his early years it's not so much to do with you don't have that much in terms of precedence to go back on. So in later scholars, that's where the taqseem al-fuqaha al-mujtahideen becomes much more of an important discussion, and that's why the first taqseem that we have is Ibn Kamal Basha, and that's during the Ottoman period, so it takes quite a bit of time before that becomes normalized. But probably a bit more of an earlier phenomena is known as the phenomena of the mukhtasar genre. So what we're going to look at, inshallah, we're going to briefly discuss in the first segment the idea of the mukhtasar, and then we're going to spend some time going through what is considered as a mu'tabar and a ghair mu'tabar book, and then we'll look at some of the examples of relied upon Hanafi text and texts which are not so much relied upon, and I'll tell you some sources where you can further investigate and study this, inshallah. The first thing we want to quickly look at is this notion of the mukhtasar. And the mukhtasar is the first process in what we can refer to as a codification of the madhahib, because the imams of the madhabs, of the founding fathers of the madhab, didn't write mukhtasars, which is basically a short compendium highlighting the position on any given issue. So rather than trying to elaborate upon the rationale and the reasoning behind it, but like a code, right? That's what the mukhtasar is. It's like a legal code to say these are our positions on these given topics. So there's a very good paper, I think I mentioned this paper earlier on in a lecture, by Muhammad Fadil, Professor Dr. Muhammad Fadil, who's based in Canada, I believe. And he's got a paper which is called, I think it's called the Mukhtasar as a Canonization of Fiqh, or something along those lines. And he kind of shows that because of the whole phenomena of the institutionalization of taqleed, which is the need for qadis to have these kind of legal codes, so they can say that this is the madhab or this is not the madhab, then the mukhtasar naturally makes sense because it codifies the madhab, and the goal of the mukhtasar is just to provide the relied upon position without detailing the rationale. Although the mukhtasar for our purposes holds a different purpose. What do I mean by this is that usually when you're studying, right, the early works that you study in any given madhab for the student of knowledge is a mukhtasar. So the mukhtasar for us becomes a stage in the process of acquiring knowledge. So you start off with the mukhtasar and then you kind of work yourself up. So that's how we kind of presume what the purpose of mukhtasar is, and that's not wrong. And you'll find many of the later mukhtasar works are for that purpose. But another purpose for the mukhtasar is that it is to provide you the correct position on the major issues in a specific chapter. Therefore, a person can easily refer back to that and say, this is what the madhab says about X, this is what the madhab says about Y. Right? So it acts as a legal code, and then you can of course go into elaborating that that legal document, if you like, by adding commentary, by adding explanations, qualifying remarks, and so on and so forth. So the Mukhtasar has this, as Muhammad Fadil explains, a form of the codification of law. Right, and this is why when you look at mu'tabar books, the Mukhtasar, it actually comes up quite high up. Or sorry, these mutun, these texts, which are generally tend to be mukhtasars, they have a very high rank within the madhab because because the bulk of what is provided within them is the muftabihi. So by knowing, or the mu'tamad, or they are accurately a rendition of what the imams of the madhab said. So that's just an important note. I would advise reading this paper of Muhammad Fadil. It should be available online. Otherwise, we'll provide access to the article, inshallah. Now, that's just a little introduction to Mukhtasar. But the other term, because the Mukhtasar generally, as I mentioned, is going to be trying to mention the relied upon position, the Mu'tamad. Now, there are terms which are used such as Mu'tamad, Mufta bihi. Right? So Mu'tamad will mean the relied upon position. And why do we have a mu'tamad? Is because the mu'tamad is us looking at the madhab and we see a whole host of different opinions. And you have the mu'tamad in every given madhab. So the Maliki madhab would have a notion of mu'tamad, the Shafi'i madhab have a notion of mu'tamad, and the Hanbali madhab will have a notion of mu'tamad. And the mu'tamad's goal is for us, for the mufti, to be able to realize what is the correct position amongst a whole host of positions. Right? So when you have قال فلان وفلان وفلان, then you say, well, which one should I give fatwa on? Then there has to be some sort of mechanism involved for one to realize what the mu'tamad in the madhab is. So one of the processes was the Zahiri riwaya and Taqsim Masail. The other was looking at who said it, right? Who said it? And in each of these tiers, the level is going to get a bit more, is made a bit more easier depending on the level of mufti. Because some muftis are not able to navigate through Zahiri riwaya, Nawadir, and Fatah Mashayikh. So what they do is they rely upon the authority of a given imam. So they say, Sheikh so-and-so said this, so we accept it. Sheikh so-and-so said this, so we accept it. Another process that a person can to take on is saying, rather than looking at the person who's given the fatwa, you look at the book that the fatwa comes in, the book that the position comes in, and if it comes in a given book, that should be given more authority than another book. Now, a lot of the times, the book and author may come hand in hand. What do I mean? So, for example, if I say Bada' Sanai of Imam Kasani is a mu'tamad book, and I say Imam Kasani is an authority figure, then generally the positions of Kasani are only known via Bada' Sanai. So, therefore, the rank of Kasani is intimately linked with his book Bada' Sanai. In other cases, such as scholars like Imam Shamsu A'imma al-Halwani, we don't have any books of Shamsu A'imma al-Halwani. So Shamsu A'imma al-Halwani is not linked to a given book to say this book of al-Halwani. No, rather it's the position of Halwani. So here the authority of Halwani, right? And likewise other such figures. So there could be sometimes people like Quduri. It may not be Quduri. I'm not saying this is the case, but saying it may not be Quduri as a jurist who may be the highest rank, but the job he did in his Mukhtasar being so meticulous, the book itself is given that rank. So there has to be a knowledge of both individuals as well as books. Now, that's mu'tamad. Then we have the notion of mufta bihi, right? The mufta bihi. Now, mufta bihi basically means what fatwa is given on. And usually speaking, the mu'tamad is what the mufta bihi is given on. There seems to be, it kind of works hand in hand. So I'll ask the question and say, what is the mu'tamad in the madhab for X? What's the mu'tamad in the madhab for Y? And then the mufta bihi is, you said, what's the mufta bihi in the madhab for this? What is fatwa given on? But sometimes what the fatwa is given, linguistically speaking even, may not be what the mu'tamad is. Why? Because there could be cases such as umum al-balwa, haraj, haja, darura, right? Where there could be certain facets or issues that come up which doesn't allow the mu'tamad to be applied. So therefore fatwa is given on something else. Now if that balwa is become umum, or it's a haraj which is not looking to finish anytime soon, then the mu'tamad and the mufta bihi will become two separate things. Because one is, you say this is the mu'tamad, but in this specific individual give fatwa on something else. but the mufta bihi in a specific era may be given against the mu'tamad of the madhab, right? So therefore, technically, there will be one which is mu'tamad, one is mufta bihi. But if you use it interchangeably, you would say then that this is no longer the mu'tamad, this is the mu'tamad. But if you want to take it more linguistically accurate, linguistically you say this is the mu'tamad in the madhab, the reliable position, but the mufta bihi is something else. All of this, la mushahata fil istilah. There's no need to get bogged down with istilahat as long as we know what we're talking about. Right? So like if I was to say to you, what's the hukm of al-ujra ala ta'lim al-Quran, the taking a wage for teaching Quran, then you rightly say that taking wage for teaching Quran, the mu'tamad in the madhab is that it is not allowed. Right? But then if I say what's the mufta bihi, you say it is allowed with certain caveats. So if that's the case, is that the mu'tamad now? Call it mu'tamad. And call it something else, call it something else. Right? It doesn't really matter. La mushahata fil istilah. Okay? So that's just some things to consider or some when dealing with this question of mu'tamad and muftabi. So what we're looking at in terms here is al-kutub mu'tamada or the books which are mu'tamad or mu'tabar. Right? Al-kutub mu'tabara, the relied upon books in the madhab, from the not so relied upon books in the madhab. So the question we're going to look at in the next segment is what makes a book relied upon and what makes a book non-reliable. Right? What makes a book reliable and what makes a book non-reliable. That's what we'll be looking at in the next segment. A last point to note is that just to kind of highlight this point that I mentioned earlier, if you look at Imam Quduri as an example, so Imam Quduri, when we mention his name, the book that comes to mind is his Mukhtasar. Right? So Quduri is intimately linked with his Mukhtasar. Rightly so. But Quduri's got other books as well, like his Tajreed, like his Sharh Mukhtasar Qarhi, and another work of his, I forget the name right now, I've got it at home, bought copies in 2 volumes. So he's got the other books. So sometimes when people say Quduri is mu'tabar, you have to sometimes highlight or to become clear that are we talking about his Mukhtasar or are they talking about the person of Quduri? Because if you affirm the person of Quduri, then that's much more larger of of literature that you're accepting as being mu'tabar. If you're saying the book, then it's just the Mukhtasar. Right? So that's important. So when you say Quduri is mu'tabar, it should be explained that whether you're referring to the person or the book. In reality, the person is what is mu'tabar as well, right? But I'm just saying these kind of things need to be highlighted so we can be on a clearer platform, inshallah. Moving on to what is exactly al-kutub al-mu'tabara and غير mu'tabara. You'll find in Mufti Taqi Usmani's book Usul Ifta wa Adabuhu a discussion on this, and actually there's a number of places now that have discussed this issue of Al-Kutub al-Mu'tabara, al-Mu'tabara. What I'll be reading from right now is from Manahij al-Bahth al-Fiqhi عند الحنفية by Sheikh Salah al-Hajj. So this will be made accessible to you, and on page 44 of it he discusses this topic. He goes actually starting from page 43, sorry. He says تفصيل كتب المذاهب الفقهية على النحو الآتي. أولا الكتب الحنفية. So he divides up into each of the madhabs, and so he's going to talk a bit about each madhab and how they have a notion of طبقات الكتب, right? And so once you know 2 things, one is the rank of a book, and number 2 is the style and method of the book, or what the purpose of the book is. It will help a person in navigating through that, because if you're not aware of the manhaj of a given book and the rank of a given book, you may spend your time reading a book which is not reliable, and furthermore you may spend your time reading a book which is not for the purpose that you are trying to do, right? So if I'm trying to do I just want to find out what the relied upon position on this given issue is in the madhab, and I'm busy looking at some very lengthy book which has all the different aqwal without any tarjih, and the purpose of the author was just to do jam', that's not the ideal place to look for this purpose. I gave an example. I did a book review a couple of months ago from this recording on the topic of it was a book on the end of times, and the author relies quite heavily on a book called which is named as Kitab al-Fitan of Nu'aym al-Hammad. Now, Kitab al-Fitan of Nu'aym al-Hammad is a book about a hadith about the end of times. Now, the problem with this book is that the author is just a compiler. So Nu'aym al-Hammad, he just compiles information, and the bulk of this information, or a large amount of this information, is unreliable. So if you're not aware of this fact, that the large amount of these narrations are unreliable, and that becomes your source for trying to write a book on the end of times, you can see there will be a massive methodological flaw in your research. Because the book is not going to help you in what you're trying to do, is for us to provide us an accurate, I would say history, right? But accurate presentation of what happened at the end of times. And the sources are dubious. And so this is where the manhaj of the author needs to be known before you can utilize that for giving fatwa. So that's why those two things are important. So based upon that, Sheikh Salih al-Hajj says, number first thing, the three categories he divides books into. From one is al-kutub al-mu'tamada, and these are those books which highlight or restrict themselves to mentioning the relied upon position in the madhab, right? And very rarely are you going to get a unreliable position therein. Very rarely you're going to get a unreliable position therein. And the reasons for them to be considered reliable. So why are we saying they're reliable? Is it because of nepotism, right? No. The reason why they're considered reliable is for the following reasons. Number one is iltizamu dhikr qawl mu'tamad fiha illa nadira, that the author binds themselves to mention the relied upon position except rarely. And the relied position is generally going to be from the method that we highlighted before, which is we stick to the Zahiri riwayah, for example, right? And you go through that process. The earlier the book, right, of course, it will be less content to go through. The later books to write the Mu'tamad, there'll be more masail, so therefore be more debate. Meaning there's more masail discussed every century. So every time you're trying to write a book after the later period, to just compile the Mu'tamad into the more contemporary masail more difficult, because a lot of the times the Mu'tamad has not been settled. Whereas in the earlier period, when it came to the issue of trying to summarize the Zahiri why is or famous position is, it was a bit more easier to highlight the Mu'tamad. The second issue is خلوها من الروايات الضعيفة والمردودة والشاذة في المذهب, is to free the book from weak and rejected transmissions or anomalous transmissions in the madhab. These are basically transmissions that go back to Imam Abu Hanifa or Sahibain via routes which are questionable, or via routes which are or via books which are questionable. And sometimes the opinion itself goes way off. So for example, you have in some Hanafi works, they mention the mas'ala, I believe it's by an individual called Makhul, right? It's not to confuse with the Makhul or the Tabi'i. This is a later Hanafi faqih, Makhul, and he, I believe, does the riwayah of Rafu' al-Yadayn breaks the salah, right? He transmits this from, I think, Imam Abu Hanifa, whoever is, that Rafu' al-Yadayn breaks the salah. So now this person has been highlighted as being a unreliable transmitter. So if your book includes the riwayat of him, then that will be an example of a book which one should be skeptical about relying upon such book because of those type of information therein. عدم مخالفتها لأصول المذهب, that it should not oppose, meaning it doesn't have masail in it which goes against the usul of the madhab. So what is established from Hanafi usul, there should be nothing within this book which goes against it. دلالة عبارتها على المقصود بدون إيهام وخلل إلا نادرة, that its text should show what the purpose is without any vagueness or shortcoming except rarely. Why is it إلا نادرة? Because every single book is going to have that, right? There'll be every single book which would have that. So the book itself can't just be relied upon, because the book itself, if it has these shortcomings, requires tanqih, requires tahrir. It requires for it to be explained and elaborated on. So therefore, to rely upon just that book will not be sufficient. So if I make vague remarks, right, and constantly, so remember, it can't just be, you can't find one or two mistakes and now say the book is not mu'tabar, because as I mentioned, there'll be no book left. Right? There'll be no book left. So what this basically refers to is that you mention the author has a habit of mentioning masail, but not elaborating on it which leaves the reader a bit confused, because it can be understood two ways, right? So because of the absence of it being clear, so a mu'tamad book has to be clear. When I read it, I know what it wants from me. I know what it's trying to say, right? So that's the the fourth quality of a mu'tamad book. Number 5 is رفعة مكانة مؤلفيها وعلو درجاتهم في الاجتهاد والفقه. And this is why I said that this was intimately linked to the طبقات المجتهدين, is that the author should also be of someone of high rank. Right? The author should also be of someone high rank. Now there could be cases in which the author is not that well known, and the book becomes popular later on. So because of the later usage of it, or a muhakkik in the method goes through and affirms its content, then that means that the book may later on become of a high rank. And there are examples of this, right? Like, I'll give you one example, which is not exactly of this, but actually no, that's for I'll give the example the next one, right? But there are examples of authors who I'll give you, actually there's a good example, right? If you look at Usul al-Shashi, right? Usul al-Shashi, which is a Hanafi usul text studied in every Dars Nizami syllabus has Usul al-Shashi therein, but the author of Usul al-Shashi is unknown, right? Those who say Nizamuddin Shashi, who dies in the 4th century, is incorrect. He's a later scholar, but no one really knows who this author is. So therefore this would make the book non-mu'tabar. But once the scholars have received the book and seen the content and see it to be sound, then it kind of makes the authorship, or the person who's authoring it, not that of an important reason, that important of an issue, because the content has been vouched for. Right? The content has been vouched for, so then the rank of the scholar, as individual, will not be that much of importance. But usually the rule is high level scholar, book is given more consideration. And again, this will also refer to the level of the mufti. So if you're a muqallid mufti, like a new person who's dealing with the madhab, then therefore the rank of the scholar becomes far more important. If you're a higher caliber Hanafi jurist, then content becomes more important than the rank of the scholar, because now you're dealing with the content, not with authority so much. So depending on where you stack up on the spectrum of your skills in the madhab, this would have more or less importance. The 6th thing that Shaykh Salah al-Hajj mentions is قبول علماء لها وكثرة الاعتماد عليها والاهتمام بها إفتاء وتدريسا وشرحا وتعليقا, which is linked to the previous, as I mentioned. So one is that you the scholars of a high rank, that's great, but if that's not the case, or even if it is the case, it doesn't really matter, right? That the book should be accepted by the ulama. Right? The book should be accepted by the ulama by relying on it, by giving fatwa in accordance with it, by teaching it, by writing commentaries for it, by writing footnotes for it. Because the more i'tina, the more occupied ulama with the text, the more we can show, the more reason there is for us to accept the content of the book. Right? Now there are also going to be exceptions here as well, because there are examples of books that were either not accessible, right, or people did not read for a long time, and then centuries later it became popular, accessible, someone popularized it, and then it became considered a relied upon book. I'll give you 2 examples, one within the madhab, one outside the madhab. So one within the madhab is famously Al-Muhit Burhani ibn Maza. The Muhit Burhani ibn Maza was a book which actually some scholars said is not mu'tabar. It was a large book, a lot of scholars didn't have access to it, so they said you can't cite that because you don't have access to the book. And so therefore a lot of these books of usul ifta, or those who discuss mu'tabar ghayr mu'tabar in the madhab, you find them mentioning Muhit Burhani as being a non-relied upon work. And there's other examples as well. I'm just giving this example. Then when the book was made accessible to jurists, like Abdul Laknawi, I believe, was the one who gained access to it, and many other scholars, and it was published, it became clear that the author has done an amazing job in collating various opinions in the madhab, and very useful fatwas that were not cited in the later Hanafi texts were in Muhit Burhani or Ibn Maza. So therefore we can now, based upon the fact that we have access to it, so even there's not much commentaries of it as we would like, or not much fatwa given on it, but because now the recent scholars have vouched for its content and we can see the usefulness of it, then something can become mu'tabar. But usually speaking, a text which is kind of left to be unknown, untouched, there's a question mark on its authenticity. So therefore, if you're a new jurist and doesn't know how to vouch content just yet, one should stay away from those sources, stick to what is known. right? It's like a person going to citing hadith and they don't know how to engage in hadith. So you say, look, stick to the authentic books of Bukhari, Muslim. Go look at Tirmidhi, what he grades the hadith. Stick to that. Don't go into these other more obscure sources. But if you are someone of a higher level of hadith knowledge and you can check hadith yourself in the isnad, then you say, you know what, check what you like, so you can, because you can differentiate between what is accurate and inaccurate. And the second example to give outside the madhab is the book Al-Muwafaqat of Imam Shatibi. The Muwafaqat of Imam Shatibi, during Imam Shatibi's life, I believe in the 8th century he was alive, the Muwafaqat did not gain much fame. And for many centuries you get hardly any real citations for the Muwafaqat of Shafi'i until it was published about 100 something years ago. And that's when the book kind of shot to fame. There's numerous factors to it. That's an example of a book that nowadays, if you go speak to scholars, they say, yes, Muwafaqat is one of the top books in the, not just in the Maliki madhab, but meaning from the books of Islam. It's from the top works of that top works, despite the fact that historically it did not gain the same amount of fame, and nor did Shatibi gain that amount of fame as he's gained now. So these are examples where sometimes you may get a certain time period with the book, for whatever reason, is not given its due right, but later on it may do, and that can happen. So these are the things to look out for. And now in the next segment we'll look at some of the examples that Sheikh Salah al-Hajj provides, inshallah. On to the last segment of Al-Kutub al-Mu'tabara, the relied upon books in the madhab, and I will tell you where you can check some of these more information out as well, inshallah. So Sheikh Salah al-Hajj provides some examples for relied upon books, and when we look at some of the case studies, we'll kind of elaborate on that, because if you look at modern studies, you don't really find it as much, these terms used as much in classical sources, but in modern studies is much more commonly used, to known as al-Bahth al-Nadari and al-Bahth al-Tatbiqi. So al-Bahth al-Nadari is the theory behind the science. So we would say, for example, these are the mu'tabar books, these are the non-mu'tabar books. And so that's, I mentioned to you the theory of what to consider. So we gave, I think in the very first lecture, the example of driving. So a person can read about driving, the theory test, but when it comes to practically speaking, when you actually come practically driving a car, you will notice there's nuances and aspects that you didn't notice, which the theory. So some of the theory is not applicable. Some of the theory you say that's correct, but it's not completely correct. There's more information that's kind of missing out. So similarly, when you look at any bahath, especially in this like introductions that we're doing, we're talking usually in generalities, and it's only when you do applied case studies do you start to see to what degree a principle is applied, where it's qualified, where there are exemptions, and so on and so forth. So what we're mentioning right now is a general, some general examples to consider as reliable books. I'll give you another source as well, inshallah, that you can read in, and then we will look at when we do case studies, we can actually deal with this a bit more. So the examples that Sheikh Salah al-Hajj mentions, he goes, Kutub al-Zahiri riwaya. Right? This is quite clear why it's mu'tabar. It actually goes back to Imam Hanifa himself. You can't really get any more mu'tabar than the books of Zahiri riwaya. I'll just give you one quick example that to show you why this is so important. And if you don't have this basic manhaj, you can make severe errors. There was a scholar, or I believe people presumed him to be a scholar in the UK, who argued that when it comes to the had for, I believe he said it was either for zina, all right, or apostasy, one of the two, right? Where he said that in the Hanafi madhab there should be no stoning, because the hadith of showing the had is khabr wahid. And so there are other arguments that people have made regarding hiraba as being a condition for the death penalty. But when he mentioned this at that time, this is 2012, the Kitab al-Asl had been published. So when he mentioned this, I sent him the page from Kitab al-Asl showing him where the fatwa Imam Abu Hanifa on this mas'ala, meaning he affirmed the had, he affirmed the punishment. And he was not aware of the rank of Kitab al-Asl, and he can try to persist with the fact that the usul says otherwise. Now the reason why he's making this error is because his manhaj is flawed. What's the flawed manhaj? Is the fact that he's understanding a usul which is derived from these books, and then using those usul to contradict what the Imam himself have said. So for example, if my opinions based upon which you're deriving usul, then that usul is using to contradict what I have said, then that either means that I have a flaw in my usul, right? Sorry, it either means that you've misunderstood my usul, or it means that I've contradicted my own usul. There can't be any third solution. So here, are we to understand that you've understood the usul better than Imam Abu Hanifa, or should we understand that your understanding of the usul is flawed? Right? So when you understand these kind of kutub mu'tabar, kitab al-asl and its rank, you wouldn't make those kind of errors. So Zahiri, why we mentioned kitab al-asl, Jami' Saghir, Jami' Kabir, Asir al-Kabir, and Ziyadat, and even its commentaries, these we consider as al-kutub mu'tabara. Then we have the mutun, right? The mutun, which are these, these mukhtasar, these short texts, which are like legal codes, which highlight the mu'tamad in the madhab, and you'll find that a lot of these mutun are very similar in content. They use certain alfaz to highlight certain nuances, but generally speaking, the bulk of it will be very similar. That's why, although I'm not saying they're all the same and there are better books to study than others, but there isn't a significant difference. There'll be a lot of overlapping content. And I think sometimes when people talk about what matan to begin with, a lot is made to say, why do you study this? Why do you study that? And it's true, there will be some books which are better than others, but you can study any of them and you will get the bulk of the madhab. Right? You'll get the bulk of the madhab. So he mentions, for example, Al-Kafi of Hakim al-Shahid, and this is a mukhtasar of Kitab al-Asl. Right, the book itself is available, has not been published just yet. I think it is being published now, even though it's taken way too long. But it's one of the earliest mukhtasar in the madhab. Then you have Mukhtasar Qarhi. The original Mukhtasar Qarhi is not available, but the Sharh Mukhtasar Qarhi by Imam Quduri is available, has just been published. You got Mukhtasar Tahawi. This is Imam Tahawi's Mukhtasar in the madhab. On it, you have two famous commentaries, such the Sharh Mukhtasar Tahawi by Isbi Jabi and the Sharh Mukhtasar Tahawi by Jassas. Both of these all three books are published. Right? You have Mukhtasar Quduri, right? The most important and famous Hanafi Mukhtasar, because of his meticulous way which he presents the relied upon position in the madhab, and then the acceptance of it. So the amount of commentaries on the Mukhtasar Quduri is unbelievable. Numerous commentaries. So because of that, the book has got absolute tahrir. So it makes the most sense to study Mukhtasar Quduri as your primer, because the student would then, by studying Mukhtasar Quduri, open themselves up to so many commentaries. Whereas if you're going to be studying a bit more of an obscure Mukhtasar, you don't get the benefit of studying commentaries in the same sense. So that's why Mukhtasar Quduri is so popular study. You have Bidayat Mubtadi, which is based on Quduri and Jami' Saghir, by Al-Marginani, Al-Wiqaya, Kanz Daqaiq, Al-Mukhtar, Al-Mawsili, Majma' Al-Anhur, Al-Nuqaya, Al-Multaqa Abhur, Tuhfat Al-Fuqaha, Muniyat Al-Musalli wa ghayruha. So these kind of texts are considered to be mu'tabar, and if you're reading more lengthier texts, you'll see them cite from the same Kama fil Waqaya, Kama fil Kanz. So awareness of these works should be clear. I'll tell you where to find out a bit more information about these books. Then you have the Mabsut works. These are these lengthier works which kind of elaborate on detail different parts of the madhab. So you have the Mabsut of Sarakhsi, which is very popular. You have the Mabsut of Bazdawi, Mabsut of Khawahir Zada, the Mabsut of Sadr al-Islam, وغيرها. A lot of these works are not accessible. Mabsut Sarakhsi obviously is. You also have Muhit, sorry. You have the Muhit al-Ridawi. Some people get confused. He's also Sarakhsi as well. That's a different text. So these are the more lengthier books. You can add in here, although he's not added in them, works such as actually, he comes I think after, right? We have books like Radd al-Muhtar, etc., which are commentaries, the shuruhat. But these kind of works, sometimes they don't leave the reader with a clear conclusion. So some effort is required to try to do tarjih, because some of the lengthier books don't really end up with a explicit conclusion. And number 3, he says the tier is, so that's Kutubul Mutun, then you have Mabsutat, then you have Al-Shuruh al-Matina, these excellent commentaries, which help us elaborate what the correct position is, qualify examples, provide other riwayat. So you have the Sharh Tahawi by Isbi Jabi, as I mentioned before, the Sharh Tahawi by Imam Jassas, the Imam Quduri's Sharh on the Mukhtasar Qarhi, which has just been published. You have the Sharh Quduri by Aqta', which is published. You got Hidayah, which is technically a commentary of Bidayat Mubtadi, and then Hidayah itself has a number of commentaries. So like Quduri, Hidayah also has a number of commentaries. So this is the reason why Quduri and Hidayah are studied. And not just because of the fact that the text is very meticulous, but the fact that when you're studying the text, how much commentaries you get. And here there's an interesting nukta that I'll highlight for you guys, is that if you're studying Quduri and you're looking at the commentaries, you can't find something, or you're studying Hidayah and you're looking at commentaries, you can't find something in the commentaries of Hidayah, Go the other way around. What do I mean? If you're studying Hidayah, you can't find it in the commentaries. Go look up the commentaries of Quduri, because the Hidayah is based upon the Quduri. And because Hidayah is explaining Quduri more or less, right? So if you can't find something in Quduri, check Hidayah and all its commentaries, because the two books can go hand in hand. Right, so that's just a beneficial note that I would say to students to kind of to keep in mind. You got Badai Sanai, which is also a commentary of Tuhfat al-Fuqaha, which is written by Imam Kasani. Tuhfat al-Fuqaha is written by his father-in-law. Imam Kasani's wife was also a faqihah. Rather, it's actually mentioned in the books of the Tabaqat that Imam Kasani, whenever he write a fatwa, it will be signed off by his wife. She's also Jewish, she will sign it off. That's actually mentioned for a number of scholars of Transylvania, that their wives were also jurists and they would actually sign off their fatawa. You got Al-Kafi, Sharh al-Wafi by Al-Nasafi, Sharh al-Wiqaya by Sadr al-Shari'a, Tabyun al-Haqaiq, these are all published, Al-Inaya, Sharh al-Hidayah, Al-Ikhtiyar, and then Radd al-Muhtar and others, right? And Radd al-Muhtar, which is also known as Ash-Shami, and it's also known as Hasha ibn Abidin. These three texts together, these three names are of the same book, right? So somebody may say, Kama fi Shami, or they may say Kama fi Radd al-Muhtar, or Kama fi Hasha ibn Abidin. It's the same book, right? It's important to know, and it's very popular because of the sheer amount of books that Ibn Abidin had access to, that he cites from. But one of the problems that you have with Radd al-Muhtar is that sometimes you don't really get clear conclusions, so it has to be read quite meticulously. So when it comes to giving fatwa, there can be sometimes a bit of confusion, so you have to read the text carefully to see what is he trying to allude to. Then you have the second tier, which are accepted books, he calls Kutub Maqbula, right? And they are where most of the works, the masail there are mu'tamad, but there's a fair amount of non-mu'tabar masail therein. And why could that be the case? Because it's not where sometimes you get the author we don't know much about. So therefore they're referencing to certain people, we're not clear who they're referencing. So it can be left vague to us, right? There could also be doubt in the ascription of the book to the author. Did the author write this or not? Right? There could be question mark, and we're not going to have for examples. There could be ikhtisar mukhil. There could be sometimes where the author, they does such ikhtisar the mas'ala that we don't really know what they're trying to allude, what they're trying to suggest, what they're trying to say. So these are four reasons why. And then there could be also that the transmission, the text is not fully preserved, because the nasikh, you only have one manuscript for example, and it's not clear what they're trying to say. So there's many passages in there that we're unsure what they're trying to say. Right? And this, he gives examples of many of the later mukhtasar works, like Ghurr al-Hukam, Tanwir al-Absar, Nur al-Idah. So even Nur al-Idah is considered maqbool, but not to give fatwa on, because the text is, there's too much ikhtisar in there. So Nur al-Idah, not saying it's not reliable in text, but there can be a lot of confusion because of the brevity in which Imam Ash-Shumbulali writes in. And then he goes on most of the commentaries as well, because a lot of the commentaries are just trying to elaborate and gather information, right? To just give fatwa on that is difficult, because there may be masail in there which are non-reliable. Of course, the more knowledge that a scholar has, the more the method, the better the jurist is, the better they can navigate through that. In the early stages, it's probably best to stick to the earlier works that we mentioned. And even a lot of these fatawa also have these same problems. So these fatawa works, which gather a lot of information, a lot of these examples are unqualified, are left unqualified. And number three are kutub marduda, which are rejected. This is because the author there's too much mixing of mu'tabar and non-mu'tabar riwayat, where it's very hard to see which one's which. So in these texts, only those who are very meticulous and know the method very well, they should be navigating through them. The beginner or the intermediate student of Hanafi Fiqh should try to abstain from these works until they build up that proficiency in the method, so they can know what the usul is. And then he cites numerous examples from the non-mu'tabar books, and he does it with the other madhabs as well. A source for you to read is the second volume, Ahmad Naqib's Madhab al-Hanafi. He actually goes through a lot of these books, and he gives a brief information about the author, the mu'tabar books are, and then overview of the book and some comments regarding it. So this allows us to conclude today's lecture, and that is by considering the fact that in the books in the Hanafi madhab of the division of mukhtasar, the division of mu'tabar and non-mu'tabar, and we have even in the middle books which Shaykh Salah al-Hajj calls maqbula, right? These are accepted books but not necessarily relied upon. So the original references for the Hanafi jurist should be the mu'tabar books, and then you move on to the maqbula, and then you can even go into the marduda, which are generally books that have been highly questioned, the content, but though that is for those scholars who have a very well grounding in the usul of the madhab, so they can navigate through them. Mufti Taqi Usmani's Usul Ifta wa Adabuhu, he provides a host of examples of books which are considered to be mu'tabara and ghair mu'tabara, and he gives examples of each. And there's actually commentaries that you can find, Al-Misbah, there's another one I forget the name of, on Usul Ifta wa Adabuhu by two Bengali scholars. So there's two books both for Bengali scholars, and they also go into great detail explaining some of these books and what the problems are. And again, there's a lengthy discussion regarding that. So that's what we looked at. We also looked at the question of the phenomena of mukhtasar, and the two benefits that we have. One is from the student knowledge perspective that we normally view it from, which is the fact that the mukhtasar allows the student to gain access to the madhab, work up to the more difficult books. But the other aspect of the mukhtasar, which is the codification of the madhab, which allow like a legal code, which allows judges, qadis, muftis to kind of refer back to as being the core and mu'tamad of the madhab. And these early mukhtasars are summaries of books like Kitab al-Asl, Kitab al-Asl, or these kind of early books of opinions of Imam Hanifa. They codify them in one place, and then they differ in popularity due to various reasons. The most important, famous mukhtasar we would say is Quduri, Mukhtasar Quduri, and then from the commentaries you say is Al-Hidayah, and then of course from the latter books you probably say books like Rad al-Muhtar. So these are like, three famous books that are like the go-to books, and then you have all these other works, of course, that you will use, and so to different degrees. So hopefully that kind of clarifies that. We'll stop on that point, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.